Okay, let's see. So we're going to be talking about the endocrine system. Right, get there. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So you know what the endocrine system is, right?
Hold on. Endocrine. Secretion. Glands? Hormones?
It's glands and hormones, exactly. So we're going to be talking about some glands and hormones. Okay, so hormones are basically they're responsible for controlling and coordinating growth, metabolism, temperature regulation, stress response, reproduction, and tons of many other functions. Right. So this little kid here, you know, one day she's going to be a grown woman, so she's going to develop through that process, and so those are going to be controlled by hormones.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is basically the endocrine system. As you can see, there are tons of places that are responsible for making hormones. And so we have the pineal gland, we have the thalamus, we have the pituitary gland, we have the thyroid gland, and we have the parathyroid gland, we have the adrenaline gland, we have the pancreas, the uterus, ovaries, and the testes, right? And so we know that some of the hormones that are made in the various glands. So, like for instance, the pituitary gland here. Here's my annotation. So we have the growth hormone. We have prolactin. We have like the thyroid stimulation or stimulating hormone. So all three, let's say all four of those are made in the anterior pituitary, where some of the other ones, the antidiuretic, hormone, the oxytocin, oxytocin, are made in the post pituitary, posterior, anterior. Of the pituitary gland. So like the thyroid, this over here. Thyroid, we have thyroxine. We have I can spell triiodothyroidin. We have calcitritin. sorry, calcitonin. So these guys are all going to be in the thyroid. The parathyroid, we have PTH, which is the parathyroid hormone. The adrenal adrenal gland, we have cortisol. We have aldosterone. And we have epinephrine. Up here in the pinna, we have melatonin. Pancreas, we have insulin. Ovaries, we have estrogen. And we have progesterone. And then for the testes, we have testosterone. Okay, so we know that testosterone is responsible for making men men. So sperm stimulation, sperm production, and also development. Estrogen, I misspelled that. Estrogen is the estrogen and progesterone are responsible for the making of women, you know, and so and then also preparing their body for childbirth. The parathyroid hormone, that is responsible for the increase of blood level calcium. Oxytocin, that's responsible for causing contractions during childbirth. It's a typo too. Sorry for all the typos. The antidiuretic hormone, basically, it's responsible for keeping the balance of it's responsible for keeping the osmotic regulation of the body, or specifically, it stimulates water being reabsorbed in the kidneys. So, and that's how it goes about keeping that osmotic balance. The thyroid stimulating hormone, it stimulates the thyroid, which is going to be responsible for, or it stimulates the thyroid producing hormones. So it stimulates the thyroid, so the thyroid will produce T4, which is T3, which is thyroxine, and T4, which is the triiodine or triiodidothyronine. Excuse me. We know the growth hormone is for making you grow. Prolactin is responsible for stimulating the mammary glands and milk production. And we know melatonin is for helping us sleep, regulating our sleep cycle. Okay, so those are just some of the major hormones that are in the body and some of the glands that are responsible for the production. Now, these chemicals can be in various classes. So some of them are going to be peptides, some of them are going to be glycoproteins, some of them are going to be protein, some of them are going to be amines, some of them are going to be steroids. So we're going to talk about that here in a second, but take one step back. So when we were talking about the nervous system, versus, and we're going to compare that to the endocrine system. Okay, so let me see. I'll put this up here. I'm going to take these guys. I'm going to clear all the rest of this. Are you good on that?
Yep. I took some screenshots.
Okay, so we're talking about the nervous system. So when we talk about the nervous system, so what is it? What is the signaling mechanism of the nervous system? What causes that signaling mechanism?
The neurons?
Okay, so the neurons causes it. Okay, so they're the facilitators. So what is specifically causing? How is it being sick? What is that process? Is it a chemical response? Is there a physical response? Is there an electrical response? Is there a combination of
like a combo of electrical with chemical?
Okay, so in the nervous system, it's electrical and chemical. So what in the endocrine system?
It'd be more chemical.
It's chemical. Yep. How to think about how to formulate that question on the exam. Okay. Can you see my yellow, or is it hard to see?
Yeah, I could see you spell electrical.
Okay. Okay, so in the case of the nervous system, what about what is it used? What is being used to do the signaling?
For the nervous system?
Yep.
Nerves, neurons. What are they called? The ganglions.
Okay. So those are the cell types that are facilitating it. But what is actually, how are the signals being sent?
Oh, to the nerves?
Yeah, how are the signals being sent to the nerves? Yes. But what is being used to send those signals?
Is it a simple answer like touch, or is it something more complicated?
It's a very simple answer.
Oh.
Or I should say, types of signals. You know, it's like if we're in the old days, they used to use smoke signals for sending messages. So what are they going to be using for sending messages initially?
Oh, wait, is it what we were talking about right now? The electrical, like they just shock each other.
So, but what causes that electrical response? Is there something that happens? Is there something that's added? And I mean, of course, when I touch something, right, I get a response as a result of that. But what's causing that response to happen? What's sending that, say, okay, this is what happened?
Oh, that's what show me.
What would be what would be the primary chemical signal? Maybe that'll help for the nervous system. The primary chemical signal for the nervous system. And let me give you another hint. Starts with an N.
N? What do you think about is neurons? That's not it.
Primary chemical signal. Without them, the neurons wouldn't receive that signal. What happens at the synaptical?
Is it like a long word?
It's a semi-long word, yeah.
Like neuro.
Think about movement across or
the neurotransmitters.
That's right. So neurotransmitters, and so what would be the one for the endocrine system? You just mentioned it at the very beginning. Oh, when I come to age, those sixth graders, and they're just out of exactly out of control. So those hormones are raging, right? And then the distance traveled, right? So these neurotransmitters, are they traveling long distances or are they traveling short distances? They're traveling both.
Short.
And that'll be distance traveled. What about hormones?
Long. Since they have to go like all around the body, right?
Yeah. So it's a combination of both. It will be both actually. So short. Some of them will be short distances, and some of them will be long distances. Short and long, depending on the hormone. Oh, oops, sorry. Yeah, I should use the screen. We'll use this one. Then we'll talk about more. Okay, what about there you go. A little bit more room. Okay, what about the response? Are they going to be fast, slow, or different, or both, or neither, or what?
For hormones, I think they would be mostly slow, right?
Well, we have some that are going to be fast, but some of them are going to be slow. So it just depends on which process we're looking at. So some will be fast or slow.
Would like the growth hormone, would that be a fast one?
The growth hormone, actually, it's going to be a pretty slow one if you think about it, right? Because it's a process. You go from when you're young, you don't all of a sudden, like next day you wake up and then you've gained 3 feet, right? Or 3 inches or anything like that. Usually there's time that it's a factor, right? So it's not really a fast one, right? What about the nervous system though?
That would definitely be fast.
Okay. Always fast. Okay. And the environment target. So the nervous system is going to be targeting which environment, internal or external?
Internal.
We're not going to have any external targets?
Wait,
What
no, no,
happens?
hold on. Right, we got touch, smell. So what, like internal and external?
That's right. Then what about hormones?
Same, right? Because it affects the outside of the body too. Like extra hair. Well, actually, most of that stuff's coming from the inside out, so mainly internal.
Yep. That's right. Internal, primarily internal. So those hormones are going to be all internal. Now, don't get me wrong, we could have things that come in our body that affect it, but that they all have to come in internally.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, clear. Okay. Sorry, did you get all of that?
Yep.
Okay, so the class of hormones that we have the amine hormone, we have the peptide hormone, we have the protein hormones, and then we have the steroid hormones. So the amine hormone, an example is norepinephrine. So it basically has those amine groups that are there. Of course, it has a carboxyl group, and you have that benzene ring structure.
Mm-hmm.
We have, or the cyclic hydrocarbon. We have peptide. So the difference between a peptide and a protein, peptides are just short sequences of amino acids. So often that's what we make reference to. Even though peptides are used to make proteins, but proteins are those long chains of amino acids. So short chains are going to be our peptides. Our proteins are going to be the longer chains. Okay, so we have the oxytocin. It's just a chain of 9 amino acids that are connected. That forms a little loop structure, and it has a tail. And so again, this guy is responsible for causing contractions. We have the human growth hormone, which has 2 subunits. You have main subunit is the one here, green. The second subunit is here in yellow. In orange. And so these are long chains of amino acids. Its orientation and its structure is essential for its function. And both components have to be present for it to actually, again, be functional. So we have steroid hormones. And so these are testosterone and progesterone. And so if you actually take a look, the difference between testosterone is that testosterone has that hydroxide attached to this ring structure here, where progesterone has a ketone attached to the structure. Okay. And you can see like some of that similarities. And so there are progesterone is actually used on an early development, and then also with before your decision of whether you're male or female is being made, right? Mm-hmm. And so, but it's kind of interesting that these guys have very, very similar structures, because at a point you're going to be making testosterone, and so, and I had mentioned this earlier. We're talking about soy protein. So soy protein is known to cause a stimulation of this, of the precursor, right? And so this is technically a precursor of testosterone. So there's one other enzyme that causes testosterone to be made. What happens in the case of soy protein, you have this precursor inhibits the protein that's responsible for progesterone being converted from progesterone to testosterone. And because of that, guys who have too much soy protein will start to develop breast and things like that, because that gets changed to estrogen.
I see.
So. So too much of anything could be bad for you, right?
Gotta have things in moderation.
Yep.
Kind of like how if you eat too much protein, your kidneys, you have a higher chance of getting kidney stones or something like that.
That's right. Well, we were actually talking about kidney stones, which also can be affected by your calcium balance. So. Okay, so okay. Okay, so there's a couple of ways that hormones could actually act their actions. So in the case of lipid hormones, lipid soluble hormones, so what will happen is that these lipid soluble hormones will actually bind on the cell membrane and are able to diffuse to the cell membrane because the membrane is hydrophobic, and so lipids are also hydrophobic, so it'll let those guys through. So it's that balancer that will actually let those guys go through the membrane itself. So then once the lipids hormone gets through the membrane, it'll actually bind to a receptor in the cytoplasm. So then that receptor is going to form a complex, and then that complex is going to be uptook into the nucleus, usually by a pore, and then it'll allow it to sit there and go through the nucleus, and then that's going to get into the nucleus, and it's going to bind to the gene itself, and then trigger gene expression. And so then that complex acts as a transcription factor. You get expression of messenger RNA, mRNA, and then that messenger RNA is then going to be translated into protein by ribosomes, and then that protein is going to go through the process of becoming active. And then as a result of that initial hormone causing everything to be turned on that it needs to be turned on. And again, this is a general case, so we'd assume that testosterone and things like that are lipid structures, right? That's more likely how they're going to be entering, or they're going to be binding to the surface membrane or internalized as well too by endocytosis. The binding of water soluble hormones. So these guys are going to be in the bloodstream. They're going to get to the extracellular matrix, extracellular fluid, and that fluid they're going to bind to a cell membrane receptor. That membrane receptor is going to activate a G protein. That G protein is going to activate adenylyl cyclase, which is going to make your ATP to cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP acts as a marker for that protein kinase, because that protein kinase to be activated. Protein kinase takes the ATP, it removes one of those phosphates and put it on the protein to activate that protein that was inactive, and then that protein is able to do its job. Sometimes that protein is going to be responsible for gene expression, depending on a lot of different genes. Sometimes that protein is just going to be responsible for interacting with some other protein in the cytoplasm, so it would do whatever function that needs to be done. Okay, but it all started with that hormone causing that to happen.
That's a lot of steps.
Yep, more than likely to be on the test.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, and the beauty is that here we're only talking about a few of the molecules that are involved in the case of this figure. There are some other molecules that are going to be involved, like for instance the phosphodiesterase. So, and I'm just telling you this just to kind of give you an idea. So, cyclic AMP actually acts on that particular protein, and it doesn't act directly on the protein kinase. And then the PDE actually acts on the protein kinase directly. So it binds that protein kinase, causes it to be activated, and then it's able to sit there and do what it needs to do. But it just kind of uses as a simple way of trying to.
All right.
And you'll see a lot of things will be coupled with either ATP or GTP being modified. You're clipping phosphates off of them. You're making cyclic AMP. So those things are going to be attended. The other thing is at the cell membrane itself, you have various lipid structures that also get phosphorylated or dephosphorylated as well. And because those lipid structures are phosphorylated, they can actually lock them into place on the membrane. So, for instance, this receptor here, it sometimes will be, rather than initially starting that G protein, it gets internalized, and then it activates the G protein when it's internalized. But if it gets locked into place by a phosphorylation event to one of the lipid structures, then it won't be active at all. It won't be able to do what it needs to do. So there's sometimes other ways to control the process. But again, it's all going to be stimulated by hormones initially. Okay. So first, before we get started, we have what we call a positive feedback. A positive feedback loop are basically when you have hormones that are going to be released in response to the original hormone released. So we have one hormone that's released, and then it kind of controls its own destiny, right? And so, like for instance, the oxytocin, it basically during the time that we're getting ready for childbirth, it's initially released to signal to the uterine muscle that contraction has to occur. And so it goes to a certain level, and then it'll actually cause...
Like it will ask for backup?
Yeah, it'll cause more oxytocin to be released as a result. So it gets amplified, so your contractions get higher and higher and higher. So you continue this release until after childbirth. Then that's turned off by something entirely independent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so a negative feedback loop does something a little bit different. So a negative feedback loop will actually serve let's see, you'll get the thing started, but it'll also serve as an inhibitor for the things to be shut off. Does that make sense? Let me give you an example. Okay, so so we have in the hypothalamus, it basically releases cortical tropin releasing hormones, also called CHR. So CHR is released, and then as CHR release, it starts this cascade that causes the adrenaline glands to release glucocorticoid into the blood. Glucocorticoid, as the levels increase, it causes more glucocorticoid to basically be released, and that's going to be all in the blood. But then there's going to be a point where glucocorticoid, when it gets to a certain level, it'll actually act as an inhibitor to the CHR being released. So it'll actually block it. So there's a receptor on the hypothalamus that will actually block that part. Okay, can you hold on 1 second?
Wait. So there's an imbalance, the hormone releases, there's a correction, and then oh, okay. So it's like a one and done thing.
Okay. So it actually there's a receptor on the surface of the hypothalamus that actually will cause that to be shut off. So that receptor then stops the production of the CRH, and then as a result of the CRH being reduced, it'll cause the stop of the glucocorticoid of being released as well too. Okay, so in this case, you have that negative feedback loop because the levels of the glucocorticoid being generated. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Was that yes, or is that sort of?
I unmuted the moment I said yes.
Okay. Okay. And so and because of the way it is, it kind of compensates for that imbalance, right? So we if we have an imbalance, we get the hormone being released, it gets corrected, and then we get to a point where we're making too much, and then it shuts itself off. And so then we start the cycle all over again. Right? Okay, so this is just the sort of the anatomy of the pituitary, the hypothalamus pituitary complex. And so you have the anterior pituitary gland, and you have the posterior of the pituitary gland. You have the thalamus, you have the hypothalamus, and then you have the infundibulum, infundibulum. Okay, and so we know that in terms of the anterior, we had the growth hormone, so we have the prolactin, peptide, we have so there's the adrenal corticotropic hormone, or just the ACTH. We have the luteinizing hormone. We have follicle stimulating. One, two, three, four, five. There's a few more. Sorry, one. The thyroid stimulating hormone, which we mentioned earlier. In the posterior, we have the antidiuretic, ADH, hormone. We have the oxytocin, and we have, and then actually, and then between the two, this guy, the intermediate zone, is the melatonin. I'm sorry, not melatonin, it's melanocyte stimulating hormone. Okay. Okay, so now the way that this guy works is, or these guys. So when we get those hormones, so in the posterior pituitary gland, so it'll actually start generating the neurosecretory cells will actually start making the EDH, and it'll release it. And then, so then those guys are going to be, as I said, produced here. It's going to secrete out release the ADH into the system, into the bloodstream. Release. Okay, so, and then in the case of the ODR, it's going to be doing through the paraventricle nucleus, and then the OT is going to be doing it through the supraoptic nucleus. Okay, and so the hormones are basically going to be stored, and then they're going to be released, stored, or they're going to be released into the bloodstream.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so in the case of the anterior pituitary gland, it makes those six hormones, and then similarly, what's going to happen is the hormones are going to be released. The hypothalamus is going to release hormones. Those hormones are going to cause the pituitary gland to actually get stimulated, and then that's going to cause the anterior pituitary to actually release its hormones. Okay, so we first will need the hypothalamus release its hormones for the stimulation of the pituitary. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one of those hormones that are going to be released is the growth hormone. And so in the case of the growth hormone, the way it works out is that we have the hypothalamus release the growth hormone releasing hormone, so the GHRH. So that hormone then goes to the anterior pituitary and releases the growth hormone. Okay, so then the growth hormone then has its effects on, one of the effects it has on is glucose sparing. And so in the case of glucose sparing, it's going to stimulate adipose cells to break down stored fat and they use for food. And, or it's gonna, or I should say, and it's gonna cause growth effects. So you're gonna get the increase amino acids from the blood. You're going to enhance cell proliferation, and so the targets there are going to be your bone cells, your muscle cells, your nervous system cells, and your immune cells. So all of those guys are going to be stimulated, and then the other effect is going to be the diabetic genic effect. And so in the case, the growth hormone is going to basically stimulate the liver to break down more glycogen, so that we'd have more sugar, glucose in the system, so that we can get growth, constant growth. So we're either breaking down those in the adipose tissues, where we'll be breaking down the stored fat, and we also be breaking down the glycogen that's going to be stored up in the liver itself to cause growth in all of our other cells. Okay, and so at the same time, those amino acids are also going to be generating so that we can sit there and get cell proliferation. Okay, so during this process, right, we could end up after we get so much growth, right, we'll start producing the insulin-like growth factor. And so like insulin, right, insulin kind of controls our sugar metabolism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so these guys are going to kind of control, in a sense, our sugar metabolism, because now we're producing glucose from our fats and then also from our glycogen. So these levels are going to end up going up, right? And they're going to be perceived to be high by the hypothalamus. And then as a result of that, they're going to cause the growth hormone inhibiting hormone to be released. Okay, and so then that's going to inhibit the growth hormone. And then so as the growth hormone inhibiting hormones released, it's going to be released to the anterior pituitary gland, and then it's going to directly inhibit the growth hormone. Okay, so here, by us doing this process, us making more glucose, it's going to end up causing the IGF to be released. That IGF, then it's going to stimulate the growth of these guys more. In addition to that, it's also going to cause the release of the growth hormone inhibiting hormone from that hypothalamus. And so you get that negative feedback loop. Sit there and regulate this. So when this guy gets too much, it shuts it off. Shuts it off.
I was thinking it was that. It just keeps going until it says, oh, okay, we need to stop. So we got to make sure nothing, like, not make sure blood glucose doesn't go too high.
Yep.
Okay, it's pretty simple, actually.
It's a nice little system. I mean, it's like a control within a control. The only thing that happens is that what happens in the case of inhibition, like you get a mutation and it knocks out this hormone, right? So if you knock out this hormone, so these guys won't continue to grow. They'll be limited by just a certain amount of growth. You'd also knock out that inhibitory effect. So you're constantly growing under those circumstances. If you get a mutation in that growth hormone, it can cause bad issues, right? Mm-hmm. So you'll have this guy continuously happening. So, but these cells won't continue to grow normally. They won't, they'd get to a certain point, and then they'd end up going through the apoptotic cycle. So. Okay. There's a couple of really nice mouse studies that were done with the insulin-like growth factor, IGF. Yeah. Okay. Oh, cool. Okay. So these are some of the major pituitary hormones and their target organs, and then these are the hormones that are responsible for releasing them, right? So for instance, in the hypothalamus, we have the ADH, the anti-diuretic hormone, and so the pituitary basically is going to store some of those hormones, and the targets of that is going to be, the kidneys, the sweat glands, circulatory systems. And then the effect is going to be water balance.
Go.
Let's see. In the case of the oxytocin, in that case, the targets of that is going to be the female reproductive system, and you already know it's going to do childbirth. So there's no releasing hormone in that situation. Oops. Okay, and let's see what else. So something else I wanted to say about this before I move forward.
With oxytocin?
I think we've covered everything, and we know that that's a positive. Oxytocin is a positive feedback loop. And see, and then in the case of the hypothalamus, we have the GnRH. So that's going to be responsible for the luteinizing hormone production, and that one's going to be responsible for, it's going to affect the reproductive system. It's going to stimulate your sex hormones by gonads. And we also have the follicle stimulating hormone being reduced by it as well. It's also going to stimulate sperm and egg production. Then we have the thyroid releasing hormone. That guy is going to stimulate the thyroid, the THS, which is the thyroid stimulating hormone. The target of that is going to be the thyroid. And then that guy is going to stimulate the thyroid hormones T3 and T4, which are your the ones that we mentioned earlier, the thyrodoxin, and sorry, can't remember the other one. Thyrodoxin and the other one, thyrodoxin and oh my gosh, T4. T4 is I wrote it down. Oh, thyrodoxin and triiodothyroidin. So often just called T3 and T4.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so then we have the PRH, which is the guy that stimulates the prolactin. And then the target of that is the mammary glands. And then that's responsible for milk productions. And PRH stands for prolactin releasing hormone. GRH, the growth hormone releasing hormone, releases the growth hormone, which target is the bone, the liver, and muscles. And then we had mentioned CRH earlier, and that stimulates the ACTH, and then the target of that is the adrenaline glucose. I mean, the adrenal gland, and the target of that, I mean, that's going to induce targets to produce glucose corticoid, and then which is going to be responsible for regulating your metabolism and your stress responses. And actually, hold on, one more. So these guys, this guy stands for that is gonadotropin. So it's gonadotropin release hormone, or releasing hormone. Okay, so this is the thyroid gland, and it's located in the neck. It's wrapped around the trachea. So if you see here, there's these little blue dots, or little white dots here. So those are the parathyroid glands. Okay, and so we've already kind of talked about the thyroid basically producing the T3, which is the thyroidin. And then T4, which is thyroxine. Okay. Okay. And then we also have the calcitonin that are being produced there as well. Okay, so if let me go. Oops, way. Okay, so if our metabolic rate, or the concentration of the T3 or the T4 is low, that's going to cause the hypothalamus to release the thyroid releasing hormone, and that's going to trigger the thyroid stimulating hormone to be released by the pituitary gland. Then that's going to be released. It's going to stimulate the thyroid. The thyroid is then going to make more of the T3 and the T4. Okay. And so then T4 is just gonna increase the basal level of the metabolic rate, metabolic rate of the body cells, and it's also going to cause a rise in temperature. Okay, so again, this is going to be another negative feedback loop. It also is going to affect the levels of, it's going to affect the thyroid releasing receptor, because there's a receptor on there. So when the levels are too high, it'll actually bind to the hypothalamus, and then it stops the production of the thyroid releasing hormone. Okay, and so, and actually, they act to inhibit both the thyroid releasing hormone and the thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay, good, bad, or ugly. So it's important to sit there and control our thyroid and that endocrine system, because without it, we cause various issues. So we know that the thyroid is responsible for metabolic growth, or the metabolic rate. It also is responsible for temperature control. So wrap it up real quick, because I have another meeting after this. I totally forgot about. Okay, so in that case, we could end up with a goiter. So let me give you a little bit of input. So since the thyroid, so if the thyroid is acting normally, we sit there, we get balance, so we're able to get normal growth, normal development. If thyroid is not active, is not behaving normally, let's say we have underproduction of our thyroid, and so we're not getting, it's not being stimulated enough, it's being understimulated. In that situation, a child is going to be born with cognitive function issues. They're going to have short statures. They're going to have they're going to end up with deafness, muteness, and that could be a result of not having enough iodine in their system. So if you have too little of iodine, because iodine is responsible, we need iodine for normal development, and iodine is needed particularly in the thyroid. So we need to have enough iodine to allow for the synthesis of T3 and T4. And if we don't have enough, like I said, we'll end up with children that have cognitive defects, shortness of statures, deafness, and muteness. If we end up with too much iodine, right, and then we're just constantly we're getting too much of it, it's going to cause our thyroid to go into hyper mode. So then we're going to have hypo thyroidism. And so in that case, that means that we've have way too much iodine in our system, or there is issues that are causing it so that it seems as if our metabolic rate is screwed up. Under those circumstances, we get the formation of goiters. And so we'll get inflammation of the thyroid gland itself. You're going to have low blood volumes. So, it often is going to be caused by a pituitary tumor or a thyroid tumor, which basically is causing us to produce too much of the T3 and T4, and it's not regulated. It's no longer being regulated the way it's supposed to be. It can lead a result of autoimmune effects, which basically causes the overstimulation of the follicle cells in the thyroid. And then as a result of that, you're going to have an increase in metabolism. You're going to have excess body heat, sweating, diarrhea, massive weight loss, tremors, increased heart rate. Often the individuals, their eyes will bulge out. They'll be more bug-eyed. And then their eyes are going to be inflamed quite a bit, a lot of swelling around the orbitals. Okay, and so this here is the parathyroid gland. So here you can actually see the parathyroid glands. Here, the little tiny ones. Those guys, oops, they're actually located within the thyroid itself, and so they're responsible for the parathyroid gland is responsible for making the parathyroid hormone, the PTH, and that's also involved in the regulation of calcium. And we're going to stop here, and we'll talk about its maintenance of the calcium homeostasis in the body. Okay, questions, concerns, Cash?
I think I heard about like an increase in the thyroid. What was it called again? Growth.
A goiter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
During the Chernobyl disaster.
Yes.
Like
yes.
people like overdose on the iodide pills.
Yeah. Yeah, and then what was also happening was that you had the radiation, and so you had radioactive iodide in a lot of cases being ingested,
Mm-hmm.
and then high levels of radiation also causes mutations and causes cancers to develop within that area. Anyway, so
like that segment reminded me of the History Channel talking about that part.
yeah.
I guess I got a bit of a refresher.
Yeah.
Other than that, I think that was pretty simple, easy class today.
Yeah. On Wednesday, there won't be a morning lecture. There's only going to be this lecture, so you may have some more colleagues that come to it because I have a meeting, so I'll be taking care of that.
Right.
Some other things. So, are there any questions? Any questions that I can handle right now? Otherwise, I have to run to a meeting. So the lab today is a simulation.
I'm good for today. Yeah. I think I'll do the lab.
Okay. So, yeah, get it done when you get it done, you know, so you have time to get it done.
Right.
Okay. Well, then I will see you on Wednesday. You have a good day.